All right, thank you all so much for your patience. We've been able to meet the threshold for a quorum, and I want to welcome you to the September 15th, 2023 EJAC meeting. My name is Martine Watkins, and I will be your facilitator here from Sacramento State. Before we start with the order of business, housekeeping will be covered on Zoom, Spanish interpretation, and a few critical details related to the Sacramento facilities. So I'll go through those now. So the Zoom details are on the Zoom orientation slide and can be pulled up onto the screen as a reminder for all comment periods. There we go, thank you. In the building, a reminder for folks that the restrooms are outside the door to the left and down the hall by the drinking fountains. In case of an emergency, exit out the door and to the right down the stairs. Next slide, please. Okay. Oh, pardon me. I think actually we'll go back to the other slide, excuse me. So today's EJAC meeting is being held in person here in Sacramento and remotely via Zoom. For members of the public participating remotely, you will be able to raise your hand in Zoom to speak during the public comment period. When it's your turn, the host will ask you to unmute, and after you push the unmute button, you may begin to speak. We will be switching off between commenters in the room and those on Zoom. Since we have a lot to cover today, we will be adhering to the 2-minute comment period limit. In the event that *6 does not work for you to unmute, CARB staff can unmute for you. We appreciate you staying on mute until it's your turn to speak, to be respectful to everybody in the room and everybody's turn. Next slide, please. I'm sorry. Oh, excuse me. Is there a translated version that's happening now?
Hi, Martine. This is Mark. If I may, just a second, I'll go ahead and relay what you just mentioned in Spanish. Is that still all right?
Yes, please. Thank you, Mark. Excuse me.
No problem at all. Thank you. Muy buenas tardes a todos que nos acompañan. Algunos recordatorios en español. La reunión de EJAC de hoy se llevará a cabo en persona aquí en Sacramento y de forma remota a través de Zoom. A los miembros del público que participen de forma remota podrán levantar la mano por medio del aplicativo Zoom para participar durante el periodo de comentarios públicos. Cuando sea su turno de hablar, el anfitrión le pedirá que active el sonido o su micrófono y después, cuando ya lo active, puede comenzar a hablar. Estaremos turnándonos entre los comentaristas en la sala y en Zoom. Y dado que tenemos mucho que abarcar, tendremos un límite de 2 minutos por comentario. Aquellos que participen por teléfono, en caso de que no funcione la opción de marcar *6 para comentar o para activar su micrófono, CARB puede ayudarle a activárselo. Y le agradecemos que permanezca, por favor, en silencio hasta que sea su turno de hablar para ser respetuoso con el turno de los demás. Cuando comente, indique su nombre y su afiliación, si corresponde, para que sepamos quién está hablando. Y haremos todo lo posible para hacer lo mismo en la sala, para que el público sepa quién está hablando también. La función de preguntas y respuestas o QIA que aparece en la parte inferior de su pantalla está desactivado para los participantes de hoy. Y claro, tendremos, como ya se mencionó, aún más recordatorios en español. Back to you, Martine.
Thank you, Mark. And I apologize, I missed a section. So I wanted to cover also, before we go on to the next slide, that you do please state your name and affiliation if possible, so that we know who's speaking. And we will do our best to do the same in the room for members of the public who knows is talking. And I know we jumped to you, Mark, but I want to also introduce our translators, Mark and Leticia, who are here on the line. And now we'll go on to the next slide, please. Okay, for those who are participating in person, to prevent echoes, we request that you click on the symbol next to the unmute button as seen in number 1. Next, select leave computer audio as seen in number 2. And also please make sure to stay fully muted for the full duration of the meeting to avoid any background noise as seen in number 3. We'll go back to Mark.
Thank you. Para aquellos que participen en persona, queremos evitar ecos lo más posible, así que le pedimos que seleccione por favor el símbolo de activar el silencio en la parte inferior de su pantalla, como puede ver aquí en la figura número 1. A continuación, seleccione dejar audio de computadora o lo que dice Leave Computer Audio, como se ve en el punto número 2. Y además le pedimos por favor que se asegure de permanecer en silencio durante toda la reunión para evitar ruido de fondo, como se ve aquí en el punto número 3. Thank you, Martine. Back to you.
Thank you, Mark. So next, we will provide instruction in English and Spanish, and then enable interpretation features in Zoom. When the interpretation globe appears at the bottom right corner of Zoom as seen in number 1, please choose your preferred language as English or Spanish as seen in number 2. Back to you, Mark, to please provide these instructions in Spanish.
A continuación, brindaremos instrucciones en inglés y en español para poder habilitar la función de interpretación en Zoom. Cuando aparezca aquí momentáneamente el globo de interpretación en la esquina inferior de su pantalla de Zoom, como puede ver aquí en el punto 1, seleccione su idioma, ya sea el inglés o el español, como puede ver en el punto número 2. Thank you, Martine.
Thank you. Okay, for individuals in the room needing in-person translation services, please raise your hand and a staff person will log you into Zoom, or do live translation if needed via the translation headsets. CARB staff will ensure that your headset is on and working prior to speaking. Mark, back to you to provide these instructions in Spanish, please.
Y para personas en la sala que necesiten traducción en persona, por favor, levante la mano y un miembro o un funcionario del personal le ayudará a iniciar una sesión de Zoom o le proporcionará la traducción si es necesario a través de auriculares. El personal de CARB se asegurará de que sus auriculares estén encendidos y funcionando antes de comenzar la presentación. Thank you, Martine.
Thank you, Mark. And if for any reason you require technical Zoom support in today's meeting, please contact Megan Caff, who is in person here in Sacramento by email as provided on this slide, and we will do our best to assist you. Today's meeting is being recorded and CARB staff will post the EJAC to the EJAC meetings and events website in the coming weeks. This is the same website where you can find all materials for today's meeting as provided on this slide. And right back to you, Mark, for Spanish translation, please.
Y si por algún motivo necesita soporte técnico de Zoom durante la reunión el día de hoy, comuníquese por favor con Megan Caff, como puede ver el correo electrónico que aparece en su diapositiva, que está en persona aquí mismo en Sacramento. Puede comunicarse por correo electrónico, como se indica aquí, y haremos todo lo posible para ayudarle. La reunión de hoy está siendo grabada, así que el personal de CARB publicará en nuestro sitio web de reuniones y eventos de la EJAC las próximas semanas el programa el día de hoy. Ese es el mismo sitio web donde usted puede encontrar todas las materias para la reunión el día de hoy, como se muestra en esta diapositiva aquí. Thank you, Martine. Back to you.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, so with that, I would now like to begin the EJAC member roll call, and I will call your name and please state your name. Correct. So first we have Martha Dina Aguero. Roll call.
Just roll call.
Just roll call.
I'm here, sort of.
Thank you,
Barely.
Martina. Juan Flores.
Here.
Oh, great. Thank you, Juan. Angel Garcia. Dr. Catherine Garupa.
Good afternoon. This is Dr. Catherine Garupa with the Central Valley Air Quality Coalition.
Announcing. Kevin Hamilton.
Here.
John Harrell Jr. Harriel, excuse me. No, okay. Thomas Helm.
Presente.
Welcome. Matt Holmes. Okay. John Kevin Jefferson III. Mayor Ray Leon.
Cheerio.
Okay, welcome. Luis Olmedo.
Presente. And que viva México. To there's their independence.
Que
And at one
viva.
point, California was part of Mexico. So just to
Hey,
recognize our history.
tostadas de frijol. We're having a little
Jill-
bit, yeah.
Jill Sherman Warren. And Sharifa Taylor. Okay, great. So that concludes our roll call. And I will now transition over to our EJAC co-chairs to go through the meeting agenda.
Babysitting today. So welcome, everybody. We're going to debrief from yesterday's meeting. And as you can see, I'm still a little punchy from yesterday's meeting. That was a long meeting. We'll be doing public comment and then a break. And then we will be talking about the 2024 priorities and planning for the remaining 2024 priorities and planning for remaining 2023 EJAC meetings. We'll be going over the cap and trade regulations and amendments and Senate Bill 905 and carbon capture and utilization. And then we'll be planning the remaining meetings for 2024. Then we'll go to public comment and the steps and closing remarks. We want to try to get out of here by 4 today. Okay, so meeting agreements. These are going to be really important if we're going to get out of here by 4. Please pay attention to equity of airtime, be present. Tell myself that again, be present, and openness, being flexible in our approaches, being realistic, and monitoring our ability to get through the full agenda. And we seek to make synergies in our work. And slide, yes and versus no. Listen and be compassionate and supportive. Reach for and invite inspiration and intuition. Look for ways to move toward action where possible. Respect the agenda and trust the process. And we all share responsibility for success. And again, I will remind folks, particularly in the public comment and others, to always be respectful, as it makes the work a lot easier.
Thank you, Martha Dina. This is Dr. Catherine, one of the other EJAC co-chairs. So just wanted to offer some opening remarks that I think will segue us into our second agenda item, which is debriefing from the September 14th joint EJAC CARB board meeting, which we just had yesterday. So first, I just wanted to say in terms of meeting agreements and along the lines of having respectful dialogue, I think no is also okay and disagreeing is also okay. We definitely want to encourage people to speak their truth. I also want to encourage us to have grace and patience with ourselves today, because yesterday was a really long day and a really long meeting and definitely a lot of heavy content. And I know my brain is still absorbing and processing some of that. I also want to say congratulations to the whole committee and the Carbon Markets Work Group for having a really successful dialogue on low carbon fuel standard and a lot of really important topics related to impacts for EJ communities. We definitely put in a lot of work, and I'm continue to be honored to work alongside you all. I also wanted to reiterate and highlight, I think there was some early alignment between part of what the CARB staff were recommending and what EJAC adopted in our resolution, which was increased stringency of the low carbon fuel standard program overall. So I think we're in agreement there. I also noted that there was a recommendation for jet fuel as a deficit generator, which is one of the recommendations that we adopted, and overall support for methane emission reductions. As we noted yesterday, there's definitely still more conversation and information warranted around electric vehicles and electric vehicle infrastructure and the full life cycle analysis and implications there. And a real urgency around regulating dairies directly in 2024, now that CARB is going to have this important opportunity. So overall, segueing to item number 2, debriefing from the meeting yesterday, I felt like overall it was a really good opportunity for dialogue, and I would like to see that increase with the board. Really, again, want to thank all of the folks who spent a ton of time behind the scenes on CARB and on EJAC's behalf. And again, lots of non-EJAC organizations to really help put together yesterday. I really appreciated the meeting being more in the evening timeframe in order to allow accessibility for community members, and in continuing to strive for equity. Would just also mention, as a single parent myself, that something like childcare or stipends for childcare would be really nice, because most of my participation stipend will probably go to paying my childcare for last night. And with that, I think we want to open it up for debrief and discussion about yesterday's meeting, things that we thought went well, and lessons learned for moving forward.
Great, thank you very much. I'm wondering if anybody would like to start, and please.
Hi, this is Jill. So yesterday, I think for me, the thing that I woke up even thinking about today was the Department of Conservation's map that they have about the carbon sequestration. And my concerns that while I was sitting there looking at the map, I kept thinking of where all of the tribes were located in California. And I think it would be really important to ask CARB if we could have that map with a layover of tribes so that we can determine what tribal impacts are, and maybe even do a layover of ancestral lands, because tribes are very heavily engaged with obtaining ancestral territories back. For example, the Hoopa tribe, we have been working on acquiring 10,000 acres that was privately held. It's the first time we've ever attempted to purchase lands, because typically we've sought legislative actions for those to happen. So my concern is that it's a current carbon project, and our tribe has been very adamant that these carbon projects, that we don't want to engage in that type of activity, because we know that means another disadvantaged community is being impacted because we're selling our carbon credits. So we would like to extricate ourselves from that once the land purchase is done. And so I think it's probably going to take a state legislative fix or attempt to fix to take that out. But I think that would be my suggestion, is that we find a way to, if a tribe is interested in extricating themselves from a pre-existing carbon project, that we find a way to allow them to do that. But again, the whole idea of carbon sequestration and tribal lands and ancestral lands, because many of our sacred areas are not held within our reservations, that these are things that we have to think about when we're thinking about impacts to tribes and the tribal landscape. So if that would be possible to get an overlay, I would really deeply appreciate it, because I think we need to have that kind of discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. I see a hand raised on Zoom, and I'll go ahead and acknowledge Kevin Hamilton at this time.
All right, give me just a second here to organize myself. I was really, I apologize, by the way, because I took up a lot of time debating with Matt, though I believe it was worthwhile, as in the end, I talked to several board members afterwards, and I was struck by the fact that they did not know most of what came out in that conversation, in that sort of, wasn't really a debate, but it was close to being labeled that, and have said, and I also had mentioned to them in Saria, by the way, if you look at the timeline, 2040 is when they end the exemption for avoided methane. And several said, well, then why don't we just move that date up to 2030? So I thought that was very powerful. And the fact that the chair recognized that these issues were very complicated and needed a lot more attention in both these areas. So, and she said that to me before I left. And I thanked her for that, and encouraged her to please set up some meetings where those come out. So I thought that was, that went very well overall. So, and thank you to Catherine and of course the team that put all that information together and presented it. I just think it couldn't have been done much better.
Thank you, Kevin. Any other thoughts or debrief? Please, Thomas.
Yeah, I was just going to give my kind of initial thoughts. I agree with Kevin. Definitely didn't mind how much time he took, because I learned a lot from that conversation. But my kind of top takeaways was that I thought it was very productive. I think it was Matt that made a comment about you know, when we have those joint meetings, how we can get that feedback kind of instantly, and it really helps a lot. And, you know, wish we could do it more. And then my other kind of main takeaway was what Diane, you know, also mentioned after somebody on EJAC brought it up, I forget, but that we've had a lot of questions that still haven't been answered throughout all the meetings. You know, we kind of, when we come across something, we kind of pose a question and we ask, like, you know, somebody get back to us on this. And it was kind of pointed out that, you know, there's still some questions, and maybe I don't know if a list already exists, that maybe we need to review it. But that was definitely, you know, part that stuck out to me, was that, you know, we've been doing this for 2 years now, and we should be able to have some kind of systematic way of making sure that every question, even if it's not answered, if the answer is not simple, that it's addressed. And, you know, that we can have, it might already exist, so sorry if I don't know, but a list of those that we can kind of come back to and check on. But I thought it was a productive meeting. Thanks.
Martha Dina.
Ditto to it, all my fellow members of the committee have said, but you know, I want to speak to you know, this has been unfolding, like the meeting in Riverside and this meeting, this fundamental disconnect between facts about the program. And I think, you know, I'm trying to think through how we can settle that. But what keeps coming to mind is, you know, there was the debate about the one slide about the carbon intensity. And I guess I want to understand why there's such a big disconnect. You know, my sense is that the big disconnect between industry and the advocates is that what we saw were folks who have deeply vested financial interests in maintaining the program as it is. And so how do I weigh the validity of that science? And I'm doing air quotes just in case that data and science, because what isn't being valued as data and science are the lived experience of the people there, right? And so we have a lot of experience with the sense of, if I don't study the problem, I can pretend it doesn't exist, right? The health impacts. For years, nobody was looking at the health impacts of living next to oil wells. And then when we started, and people assumed safety. And so I think that somewhere we need to get together with staff to see how we weight those things moving forward. And I also, I don't want to read the Soraya, but I guess I'm going to have to. And then there's this whole thing of GREET. Did I get it right? So we want, and if it's confusing for us, I would imagine that many of the board members felt those same things. So if we can figure out how to clear those up and provide that to the board, that I think will be really helpful. But a big part of that has to be that this is about, if we're going to center equity, and that has been the promise, then we need to look at the data differently.
Martha Dina, and I'm speaking closer, so hopefully folks can hear me better now. Any other thoughts on the meeting yesterday for the debrief portion of today's agenda? Okay. We'll wait just a few more seconds. Oh, please, Luis.
Are we just on regular? Okay, just some observations, right, about. So this is a significant program that CARB manages. And I'm now seeing that at the federal level, there is now requirements that communities where these projects are being located have a say, and that they actually support projects. And we know that that's kind of in the best practices built in. But one thing that isn't built in that is fairly new is that now there's requirements that you have to have community benefits agreements or MOUs as a condition to tapping into government dollars. So California is a leader nationwide and globally. But wait a minute, is it? Why is it that the Department of Energy and other federal programs are now requiring that there be MOUs and community benefits agreements? But somehow these resources are thought to be a pot of money for industry to basically manage their own waste. And we're going to pay you to be a good actor. It's like, wait a minute, don't we have laws and regulations? But if that's the case, and if this is sort of the incentive, then why isn't CARB being the leader in establishing requirements as a condition to having access to these dollars? One is, are these projects going to cause harm? Is it going to incentivize the creation of pollution for the generation of low carbon fuels, right? And I think that's kind of what we heard. I have a feeling, and kind of observing the whole picture is like, why are we even having this conversation? Why didn't we catch these things early on? And I wonder if that's where the life cycle of it comes in, or what else needs to happen to assure that we're not creating these conditions that in the larger picture, it continues to make environmental justice communities the sacrifice zones. So the very simple, I would say, goal that I would find as a great metric of success, not limited to, but certainly one that should be simple for us, given that other federal agencies are now stepping up and saying, maybe we want to be the leaders, and maybe we want to show up California, and we're going to require community benefits agreements, and we're going to require memorandums of understandings, and we're going to require to assure that the community supports them before we release or even consider or review any application. So that's my thoughts of it. But we're only the EJAC, right? That's all we are. I don't feel that at this point, CARB really treats us as we're really all that significant. But I appreciate the board, because the chair and the board do seem like they care about what we have to say, right? But we should do all the hard work at the staff level, leadership level, before we get to the board, because we should be ready. We should have already talked about all of this so that we can bring some progressive California exemplified leadership, leaders of the world examples. And the other thing is, it's like, why isn't more of these programs being made available to our communities? Why does it always have to be large, mega projects, Wall Street projects? Why aren't we giving, I think it was Jose Saldaña, there might be opinions of some agree or disagree, but I understand what he's talking about. Our neighborhood experts continue to be treated as their only capacity, their only skills is to be the ones that build it for the funder, for the one that's bankrolling these projects, or what do they call it? Anyways, venture capital and all that. Our communities and our neighborhood experts are bringing a lot of this expertise, but yet they're not being given that opportunity. It says, you can be an owner too. You can own your own company. Community organizations, you can build your own models, leave the money in California, invest the money in California, invest it in your neighborhoods to make your neighborhood better, right? I don't see any of that. So I think that the California Air Resources Board has a huge opportunity to play catch up and to lead. But that's gonna have to come with openness and a welcoming. Yeah, that's why I wear a coat and a white shirt, because I think that that might give me more access. But I'm waiting for it. There's probably something I'm missing to be able to have more access, right? I think I'm gonna wear a tie next time, right? And if that's not enough, then maybe I'll learn the language, right? Or maybe next time I'll get an address in Silicon Valley, and maybe that will give me access, right? I'll do whatever I need to do to be able to open up the opportunities for our environmental justice neighborhoods, communities, to make sure that they partake in these economic models, so that we're not pretending it's about EJ, but yet we're just creating new markets, but that we're actually getting these dollars into our neighborhoods, into our communities, so that we take full opportunity. And unless there are developed metrics, standards, we're not gonna do that, right? Because then it's like, you know, it's kind of what left up to a few people to decide how that happens. So I hope that my comments are well taken. I would love to say them in a much kinder word, so they're not taken as like, oh, you're speeding us up. No, I think I'm putting some real constructive, positive opportunities to be able to change sort of our habits of like always depending on a certain profile or type of investor. Let's make our communities also, give them the opportunity to also be resilient about environmental justice, about equity, about social justice, so that at the end of these programs, when we look at the numbers, it looks like, oh, it's money's going to the same places. What are we changing, right? All we're creating is new market opportunities, but we're not really changing the environmental or climate outcomes. So thank you.
Thank you. Martha-Dina.
One, I think we should, there's a lot to unpack in that, because if, you know, I've looked at some of the things that proponents, supposedly NGOs that are nonprofits that are also part of this whole industrial complex trying to build carbon capture, and they are learning from the environmental justice community and saying things like, we'll have project labor agreements, we'll have community benefits. Well, you know, so we should be clear about where we want those benefits to be and where we don't, because we, you know, blanket give, you know, saying, I'm going to approve your program because you've got a project labor agreement and because you've got, you know, some way to give money to some people in the community that said yes to your project. That's dangerous, right? That's incredibly dangerous to EJ communities, because I've seen projects that divide communities because their outreach just reached out to a few of them and it gave them, those few, something. So I think we should be really thoughtful about how we use those kinds of incentives, and they should be used for projects that are actually bringing benefit to community, and that aren't extractive in that nature and aren't expanding the, you know, you can't give us golden inhalers while you're poisoning us, right? And so I think we should be, again, really thoughtful, and this might merit some further conversation about what types of projects should have that, and which ones, even if they have that, it's still, you know, it's a dangerous precedent to set, to just say all of them should have that, and we should, you know, think carefully.
Thank you. I don't believe there's any other hands raised or EJAC members interested in commenting at this time. So do we have? So if that's the case, I think we can transition to public comment then. Thank you. So this will be the public comment period, and we'll be monitoring the Zoom and in-person commenters. So we've tried to allocate equal time to each comment period in today's meeting. As mentioned, we'll be limiting comments to 2 minutes per person. We ask that you please be as succinct as possible so we can get through everybody's comment and to more of our meeting's agenda items also. If possible, please state your name and affiliation. So I want to see here if we have any public comment in the room. None in the room. Okay, we have Jan Warren on Zoom. You have 2 minutes.
Oh, I got a clock. Okay, thanks. Jan Warren, I live in Contra Costa County and I'm with the Interfaith Climate Action Network of Contra Costa County. I want to say that sometimes when solutions are conceived to fix a problem, more time is spent on modeling and tech assumptions and not enough time on unintended consequences, particularly consequences that create new problems that then need to be fixed and solved. Anytime funding is generated to help solve a problem, more time and thought needs to be considered first. Last night, the CAPO group was there at the end, towards the end of the meeting, and I was tired. And I had attended the September 5th meeting where they were talking about, oh, we're going to need 380 more digesters to meet these goals. And so they're always going to be moving. They're essentially maybe scientists, but think of them as salespeople because they're always trying to see how they can get more and not so much about the community. They want to use the community to reach their ends. We're still living with the aftermath of the gold rush mining. So when you talk about these CAPOs, as Kevin said last night, you know, when it's all gone and they've moved on to the next project, all this mess is still left there. So I appreciate all the comments and the discussion last night and all the hard work that the EJAC committee's been doing. And just want you to know that the community outside of your community within this state really cares about the social justice and fairness. And I appreciated Jill's comments as well today with the tribes. Thank you.
Thank you. If anybody else would like to comment on this item, please raise your hand. Seeing no additional hands raised, we'll go ahead and continue forward then with our agenda. We will be moving forward and not having the break at this point, and we'll go straight. Oh, excuse me. One more. I'm going too fast. Let me give them just one more minute in case any other folks want to raise their hands. Seeing no additional hands raised, we'll continue to move forward. And we'll transition now to our next item, which is the 2024 priorities and planning for the remaining 2023 meetings. And that will be led by our co-chairs. So I'll hand that over to Dr. Catherine and Martha Dina.
I think first we were going to get a presentation from CARB staff, and then we were going to have some discussion.
Great, thank you. Pardon me. So we'll go ahead and start then here with the presentation from CARB staff. Okay, Rajinder, you're unmuted, so feel free to take over. Thank you, Dr. Catherine.
Thank you. I'm hoping it's a lot cooler in the room there today than it was last night, which was getting quite unbearable towards the end setting point. So I hope it's a more refreshed setting for everyone. So I don't have a presentation, but I'm going to talk through the process for cap and trade, SB 905, and some of the work going on.
Rajinder, your audio is coming in a little bit muffled. Is there anything on your end that might be able to? No.
I'm using a microphone.
Could perhaps using just the computer audio work as an alternative?
Does this work better? I have a full signal.
Okay.
She can rejoin.
We're going to try on our end here if there's anything we could do. Just for a second, please.
I'll hold on.
Keep talking, Rajinder, so we can try it out. Tell us a good joke. Remember what Tom said. You tell a joke, then people
well-
listen.
You're too young to start. That's a joke from when I was a kid. That's what-
Okay. Regina, do you want to try turning your video off potentially? I'm not sure if that will.
Does that help?
Actually, it does. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, that actually didn't quite do it. It's still quite muffled.
Is this better?
Yeah, a little bit better. We'll have to try.
I'm right next to my laptop on the mic.
Okay, there we go. There we go. Thank you.
Okay, I'll just not turn the camera back on. So I'll just quickly go through where we are on the status of each of these. So on the cap and trade regulation, just as we do after every scoping plan, we look at that program to see what alignments we need to make in that program to support what the latest scoping plan is laying out and any new statutes and targets. And so there are informal workshops that are underway that are looking at making the program more stringent because the 2030 target of 40% is not stringent enough to achieve carbon neutrality by 2045 or be on the path to reduce emissions by 85% below 1990 levels by 2045. So that is the biggest thing that we're looking at, how to make the program more stringent for the rest of this decade. And then also how to make sure that we think about allowance allocation, minimum for leakage, we think about impacts to ERF and all those things that are in statutes. So there's a public process underway for all of that. We've had a couple of meetings. They are recorded and the slides are on our webpage. We are happy to have that material presented again in front of the EJAC at one of your public meetings if you'd like us to go over it and have a focus session on what we've already discussed and hear your comments. On workshops moving forward, as we post those materials and have those, at the request of the EJAC, we're very open to coming back and presenting on any new materials as you think about any requests or input that you'd like to provide in this process as we work towards any public proposal. A public proposal would not be made until 2024. The regulation does not go to the board until 2024. Just as we did for LTFS, we will be looking to have community listening sessions, and we will be looking to make sure that there is dialogue with the board, with the public, with you all, as we get information and materials available for public discussion. So that's the timeline. Biggest thing is making it more stringent, thinking about 2030 in a different light than the 40%, 48%. Happy to take any questions on that piece, or I can go on to SB 905 and Natural Working Lands and then take comments on all three. Is there a preference?
Do you prefer continue and then questions at the end? Yes, please continue and we'll have questions at the end.
Okay, great. On SB 905, which is the Carbon Capture Utilization Sequestration Program that was signed into law last year and passed along with AB 1279, we had an interagency workshop earlier in August. No, actually it was September. And it was across the Natural Resources Agency, CARB, Department of Conservation, and Geological Survey. So to set up that program for SB 905, it's not just a CARB program. There is work that has been assigned in that legislation to several agencies. We will continue to work with those sister agencies in public workshops, virtual and in person, and in community listening sessions. Because there has been a specific request as part of that kickoff workshop to be in person in communities, we will be trying to partner with our sister agencies to be in person in some of the communities that we heard from. So that is part of the ongoing process to collaborate and make sure that we get an inclusive process, not just industry, but also the community feedback. As those materials are put out, we're happy to again come present in front of the EJAC. We're also happy to coordinate any requests for our sister agencies to present at the EJAC publicly noticed meetings. So that offer is out there as well. The piece for SB 905, that is the park, we just got the budget signed and we're in the process of hiring staff. And we have not hired the staff for that, it's all new work. So we are in the process of hiring staff to begin that effort in earnest. The earliest CARB would take anything to our board on SB 905 is 2024 as well. Probably the second half of 2024, just because we're still in the process of hiring staff and we want to make sure that we have a public process there. Then on natural working lands, there is an interagency effort across natural resources, Department of Food and Ag, and CARB, and it requires CNRA to establish targets for natural working lands by the end of 2024. So again, another item that is for the 2024 calendar year. CNRA and CARB have established an advisory committee, which is required by statute to provide advice in setting those natural working land targets. That committee has had 6 public meetings thus far. And I know that one of your fellow members, Matt Holmes, is on that advisory committee. And we heard him mention it yesterday about collaboration across the EJAC and that committee. The topics the committee has heard include existing land management goals of natural working lands, deeper dives on issues around pesticides, organic farming, urban forestry, greening, rangelands, grassland, carbon, land conversion for deserts, rangeland, and ag. We expect that the targets will be focused on implementation levels, such as a certain kind of activity on a certain number of acres. To support the 2022 Scoping Plan Natural Working Land Carbon Target and other CNRA land management targets. CNRA is the lead and they held a community listening session on target setting in August, and CARB participated in that listening session. CARB is still hiring additional staff to support our work on AB 1757 and help on the implementation of any targets that are set there for the long term. That's really a high overview of those 3 topics, and I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Rajinder. We have Dr. Catherine with a question.
Yeah, actually just a few comments and responses. So Dr. Catherine, Central Valley Air Quality Coalition. First, Rajinder, thank you for the overview. Definitely very helpful. And I know we only made this request about a week ago, so really appreciate you making yourself available to provide us these details. EJAC members have varying levels of capacity to engage in these different processes. So it's important that early on we get a level set now that we're a permanent committee so that we can all kind of be on the same page about where some of these priority rulemaking processes are at. So I know also our request was kind of vague, like come present us information on this. But again, it's helpful for us to know where the process is at. So on behalf of the Carbon Markets Work Group, I can commit to taking the question back about whether we'd like the workshop info represented to us either as a work group or the entire EJAC. So thank you again for that offer. I also wanted to propose to the EJAC for consideration that in November that we schedule an agenda item to hear an analysis about no trade zones and its potential impact on the cap and trades program that was conducted by colleagues at the Independent Emissions Market Advisory Committee. I think it would be helpful to hear their analysis on one of the recommendations that we made about the cap and trade program. Also wanted to acknowledge and really appreciate the commitment on SB 905 for community engagement. And I know CVAC staff has been in touch with CARB staff about having local workshops and really being able to hear from impacted community members about questions and concerns there. And last comment on the natural and working lands piece would be, I know Matt's not here, so I don't want to speak on his behalf, but I've heard from him multiple times as a member of the 1757 committee, a request for a meeting between that committee and the EJAC. And I think he's sent a couple of emails. So maybe not a direct question to Regender, but just CARB staff in general at some point, if we could get an update on what the status of that meeting request is, if we can make that happen in the next few months, it seems like that might be a good opportunity. So thanks again. And that's just some of my feedback on the carbon markets pieces.
Thank you, Dr. Catherine. Anyone else for questions or comments on Regender's presentation? Thomas, please.
Yeah, I had a question. I spoke yesterday about, the projects going on in Stanislaus County that, are leading to a carbon capture project where I live in Riverbank. And I know 905 lays out that there's not supposed to be any increased pollution in disadvantaged areas, EJ communities. And, I said how the plan is for this carbon capture project was to ship in the carbon by truck. I don't see how that's not increasing pollution in that disadvantaged community. So I'm just wondering how that's going to look, what kind of mechanisms there's going to be to actually enforce that and make sure that it doesn't happen.
And that's a great question because for more.
Oh, I was just gonna say, if that's a really long answer, you could, discuss some of it now and leave some for, later email, but whatever information you have now, that'd be great.
Sure, I'm happy to give you the status of what we are able to talk about today here. So 905 requires that there's requirements on project operators that they avoid any increases of cumulative exposure in disadvantaged communities, and that all projects have to be in compliance with all rules and regulations to protect public health and safety and permitting. And it says that if the cumulative exposure has to be reduced. So we haven't formulated the rules and regulations under SB 905 to lay out how exactly that would be demonstrated and what would need to be in place to have that happen. I would welcome any feedback from the EJAC on how to develop requirements on how you ensure or evaluate what cumulative exposure looks like. We are also looking at that with our research division who does the work on health, and with work that's been done at US EPA and in other academic institutions. But I welcome any thoughts you may have on that piece. But the projects that are underway or starting or being discussed or moving in some kind of administrative fashion underway, ultimately, when we have SB 905, they have to comport with that regulation because that is the regulation for how those projects are to be established.
Great, thank you. Martha Dina.
Actually, Jill was first.
Excuse me, Jill.
All right. I'm just really curious is how are you going to assess that? Like, who is assessing? Do you have an enforcement branch that monitors this daily?
So when there's requirements, we haven't written this entire regulation yet, so I can speak to how our regulation process works. Once we put those regulations down and somebody takes action under those regulations, like a project developer for a CCS project, then they have to continuously show that they're in compliance with that project. We have the ability to audit that project randomly. We don't have to give a heads up. We can go audit those projects. If we find violations of our regulation and how that project is being implemented, we enforce on those violations. And we post all those violations on our web pages annually and put out an annual report about what the issue was, what code was violated, and the penalty that was paid on that violation, and the action that had to be taken to correct.
So the polluter is supposed to tell you if they're violating the standard?
No, that's not how our regulations work. Our regulations require us to be actively auditing and monitoring and doing site visits when there's activities under our regulations that are being conducted in the real world. We are the ones that are out there. It's our eyes and ears that are out there to make sure that we're tracking, auditing, and then enforcing as applicable.
So you're increasing monitoring on site?
Well, we have a significant amount of resources for our enforcement division. We're getting some resources for development of the program. It's those resources that will be out there monitoring and auditing. Obviously, when you have, like even in our truck regulations, you have thousands of trucks. We can't monitor every truck. We have auditing plans where we go through and try and pick up as many as we can through the course of a year. There's just no way we can send a person to every place for every regulation to do enforcement every instance of every day. So it's an auditing plan based on where do we think the biggest risks will be? What is the regulation? Is there the potential for a community to be harmed because it's adjacent to it? Those are the kinds of things that go into developing those plans. And some of that is found on our enforcement website.
Interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Any hands raised for questions for Rajender? Nothing on, oh, excuse me, Dr. Catherine.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up. I think this is definitely a rich conversation and figuring out how some of these projects might play out in the real world. And again, you know, from a valley-based perspective, being really concerned about increase in criteria air pollutants. So at the kickoff workshop, Rajender, I believe it was shared that the Air Resources Board doesn't have any new regulatory authority under SB 905. And also, if I'm following the conversation, you just said that there are still aspects of the protocol that need to be fleshed out. So do you know specifically? And I also heard that it's a new scope of work and staff will need to be hired. So apologies if this is repetitive, but what is the timeline for establishing the part of the regulations that you all don't already have in place? Because as we know, there are projects that are actively moving now.
That's a great question. So with the time it takes to hire staff, we will continue to engage in public discussions over the course of the rest of this year and partnering with our sister agencies for some of those community in-person listening sessions. We probably don't have any regulatory concepts out until sometime in 2024, because we want to make sure that we have discussions with stakeholders and that we also have the right resources to be able to flesh out some of those details and make them publicly available. So it's early 2024, early being the first half of 2024, for the time frame from when we will put out any regulatory concepts.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I don't see any hands raised at this time. Please, Thomas. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would just like to ask a follow-up, my own personal curiosity, and I'm talking about this specific project. So my understanding is there's this, business park where an EIR was done, that did, calculate how the types of businesses that they wanted to bring to this business park and how many trucks, that would add. And it was determined that the traffic and the air pollution would be significant and unavoidable. And they actually used the overriding consideration to just do it anyway. And so part of what I'm hearing is that this project, as long as it's not going over what they originally planned to do with that business park, that it's going to be okay, even though that was established with the overriding consideration. And it's still going to increase the current pollution that it'll be there. But it's kind of like, well, 10 years ago, we planned for that pollution all the way up until now. So we're not increasing it because it was theoretical since 10 years ago. Am I understanding that right? Is that going to fly even with 905? Or are we going to have, a new tool to be able to say, no, you're increasing the pollution that exists now. It's going to be more when you start bringing those trucks in.
So I'm not familiar with what EIR you're talking about. It sounds like it's a business park and not a project. It's something that's already been developed and put out there. what I know is 905 didn't give us any new authority to weigh in on local EIRs. CARB doesn't get to make those local EIR decisions on projects. We don't have that authority. It's made at the local level. And I think that's part of the confusion that came out of 905 is, did CARB get new authority to be able to weigh in officially on any EIRs or local CEQA documents? We did not. We did not get any new authority to do that. And so if CARB, just like we do with our regulations today, we can put out the requirement. Anyone that wants to do a project under those requirements has to meet all of the existing requirements, whether it's for EIRs or CEQA, water permits, any of those other permits that are required. They have to meet all those requirements, and still the relevant agencies that have jurisdiction over those permits, they are still the leads. They get the final say. CARB does not get that say. That did not change for us.
So the local city council would be able to say, okay, that's okay, that's what we planned for, that planned pollution. I'm sorry, that's what it just seems like you're saying.
What I'm saying is that I'm not familiar enough with this project to know the details on who is the right governing body for the CEQA or EIR at that local level. But CARB, what I do know is CARB did not get any new authority to be able to say yes or no to projects based on EIRs or CEQA. We don't have that authority. We've not had it, and we did not get any new authority on that.
Okay, so 905 and the language in that is not, superseding, I guess, this authority that you're saying to the local jurisdiction.
That's right. Whatever authority the locals have, they retain.
Great.
Bertadina.
So I want to point out just a really profound contradiction. Last year when SB 905 was, I can't remember if it's SB or AB, when 905 was being negotiated, communities really wanted, I didn't believe, but communities really did believe and wanted to believe that somehow this was going to give us guardrails. And what we're hearing is, oh no, if a project is already underway, well, CARB doesn't have an authority, even though we don't have guardrails or rules or protections in place for communities. These projects could go ahead because at some local level, they've decided it's in their best interest of, I don't know who, but to do this. So I'm just like, there is going to be gigantic problems if these things get built before there's a regulatory structure that we also know is, leaks like a sieve. There are very few protections. We're here because those protections haven't worked historically. We don't really see a trend toward them getting any better. And so I don't know that you have an answer for Rajinder, but it is sort of troubling that communities were promised guardrails and there's no guardrails.
I completely understand your concern because there are several projects and announcements that are out there that seem like they should be under 905, and 905 isn't fully established and adopted as regulation. What I know is, in talking to some of our sister agencies and some of the locals where these projects may or may not happen, is that because of the administrative timeline for any kind of permitting or approvals, we're going to be done with 905 before those projects actually begin construction, because there's approvals at the US EPA level, there's approvals at the local level, there might be approvals at some of our other sister agencies like the Water Board that need to be made. So I am not aware and don't believe that there will be any projects that will be developed before and operating before we get an opportunity to flesh out 905 and have a board vote on 905.
Any additional? Tom, do you have your additional, or is yours still left up from last time? Okay, well, my understanding is Rajinder, well, you'll be on the line, so if there are additional questions that come up, potentially we can have you available if needed. So at this time, the agenda has us moving back to the co-chairs for a discussion on the remaining 2023 meetings on October 13th and November 9th, correct? Hand it over to you, Dr. Gu.
Thank you, Martine, and thank you again, Rajinder, for that presentation and making yourself available. I think these types of conversations are really important to get clarifications on the scope of CARB's authority on issues that are definitely important to EJ communities. So for the remainder of 2023, we have meetings tentatively scheduled for October and November. And then we want to look forward to 2024 and start talking about what conversations we want to have on behalf of the Carbon Markets Work Group. And as was seen on yesterday's agenda, we anticipate Senate Bill 905 implementation and the cap and trade rulemaking to definitely be priority items. And we also want to use this agenda item today to hear from committee members and various work groups, their priorities and interests for future agenda items as well. So I already teed this up a bit and mentioned that I have requested on behalf of Carbon Markets Work Group a November presentation on some analysis about the no trade zones concept. So that's just an initial offering to the committee. And I think this is, those are the types of proposals that we want to make space for now. Also, if there isn't an update available today, potentially at the next meeting, if we could have an update on the request for a joint meeting with the 1757 committee, that seems like that might also be a relevant topic under natural and working lands for the coming months. And with that, again, I think we want to open it up to the committee for feedback on important goals and priorities. I know EJ policy also is an ongoing priority, and the work group wasn't able to meet in the handful of weeks between October or August 25th rather and today. So I would expect that to come back as well. Martha Dina, were there other agenda items for 2023 or 2024 that you wanted to discuss or propose now?
No, I would imagine we want to add building decarb to the growing list of issues that we're going to take up. But if I recall correctly, the regulations are going to start until 2024.
Any other EJAC members wanting to weigh in on this item? With your hands raised?
Were there any thoughts about specific items for October, since October is fast approaching?
This is Dr. Catherine again. Just one other invitation that I wanted to lift up that I think we might want to consider as a committee for early 2024, as I know the research division has offered to meet with us and talk about their process and the types of research proposals that they get. And also, I think we've requested talking about concepts like conducting the life cycle analysis that we were emphasizing yesterday as being kind of an overarching ask for multiple rulemaking. So would also ask that we anticipate calendaring that as a committee early in 2024.
Martha Dina and then Gulti Sharif.
Thank you, Catherine. You jogged my memory. We do want to meet with, so we were really appreciative of having a chance to talk to the research folks and want to do more, but also the health effects folks, so that we can get a better understanding of some of the inputs into the health modeling.
Sharifa. Welcome.
No worries, I wasn't physically here, so don't expect it to be where a phantom person wasn't. So I had two clarifying questions. When you, Ashley, said October's, whatever was October, I don't remember what you said, sorry. Can you repeat what that was? That was just like the agenda for October? Could you repeat that?
Just curious about any thoughts that the committee might have about October, since we like to plan a little bit ahead for our meetings. Because I didn't hear any specific items that were slated for that time, so just was curious.
Okay. And then I actually had an idea, Dr. Catherine, because you had mentioned about the research department and me being a researcher in my non-EJAC life. I mean, I guess I'm one here, sort of. That's, I guess, why I ask all the clarifying questions that make people love me. Dang, how'd I get another bruise? I'm gonna have to ask a question about that. Anyway, I was wondering if we could, like, while you all are planning the liaison, whatever, with the research department, if you could ask them, have they ever done a life cycle analysis? Like, since it's something that CARB is ignored the request for 4 times now, like figuring out if it's been ignored because it's us asking or if it's because they don't have the experience to do one. No offense to that question, to the CARB folks in the room, just like a serious consideration.
I think there is one on the low carbon fuel standard. And so that's what I really want to understand. What are the inputs?
And I know Rajinder has her hand raised, or?
No,
Go ahead.
I'm here. So my portfolio also includes the research division. They have an annual research budget that looks at lots of health-related issues and air pollution-related issues with academics and institutions around the US, not just in California. I am taking notes that I should ask them if we've ever done a air pollution life cycle study of any specific technology or of any specific fuel. I don't know the answer to that, but I'm going to take it back and ask them. They are also the same people that do all of the health impacts for all of the regulations and plans at the agency.
Thank you. Martha,
I do want to add in, maybe I can bring some of these folks to provide, maybe a little webinar through PSR. I did participate in a full life cycle assessment of a technology. It took a while and it was fascinating. But and maybe what I will do is I'll get PSRLA to do a webinar around life cycle assessment and bring in some of the scientists that we work with, including some out of Lowell who are doing alternatives assessments. And would, love to have the participation of some of the CARB staff as well.
Hello, Deldy Reyes, CARB. Just wanted to go back to some of Virginder's opening remarks and remind the group that I believe I heard, Virginder, that there was an offer for staff to have a conversation with the EJAC using the materials and information that has already been shared at some of the public workshops, for example, for the cap and trade. So if that's something that the EJAC would like to program, then we can give staff appropriate notice.
Yeah, thanks, Deldy. We're absolutely open to bringing those materials back and sharing those at one of these meetings so that we can engage in a more focused way with the EJAC on the materials that we're presenting in our workshops.
Dr. Catherine, and then we have Kevin online after.
Yeah, thank you for that, Martha Dina and Rajinder. So I was just having a sidebar with Martha Dina, and we were wondering if it's possible in terms of timeline and capacity. We don't have a lot of items proposed currently for our October agenda. So if it might be possible to have at least a snapshot overview of the existing life cycle assessment for the low carbon fuel standard, maybe that's an early opportunity to look at existing work to see what CARB has already done and be able to start the conversation about ways that we might be able to help recommend enhancements.
Yeah, I need to go back to the team, and I'll probably need to send the co-chairs a couple of questions to make sure I'm fully understanding the expectations there. But we can certainly commit to being available to be at the meeting. It's just I need some clarification on the exact topics, and we can do that through the co-chair meetings.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Hey, Kevin, you have your hand raised. We'll go ahead and have you unmute now.
Great. So I had a reach out after the meeting last night from Colin Murphy, who's the Deputy Director of UC Davis's Policy Institute for Energy, Environment, and the Economy. Virginia, you're probably familiar with him, but he is one of the folks who has put together the Low Carbon Fuel Policy Research Initiative there, and the modeling that CARB is using and advising that, part of the group advising that modeling. And he's happy to do a presentation for us to talk more in detail about that. And as people heard about the GREET formula yesterday, but yeah, obviously we want that presentation to not be highly technical, but technical enough to get the idea across. And some of the recommendations that they've made to CARB over the year regarding assumptions and what kind of approach CARB should be taking in avoided methane credits for regarding digesters. So I thought that would be really useful for us to know.
Yeah.
So if we're interested, that's great. Just putting it out there.
Yeah, and Kevin, I just want to make sure that for full disclosure, the work that Mr. Murphy is doing at UC Davis is not directly related or associated with the work that we're doing. This is one of many things that they're looking at their Transportation Studies Institute. So if there was some confusion that may have been introduced about their role or Dr. Murphy's role relative to our work, it's independent of what we're doing. And so I just want to make sure that there's no confusion that they are somehow working for us or under contract or with us. They are completely independent.
Yeah, he's not saying they're working for you. He's just saying they've been advising the process through their.
Yeah, so they're another interested stakeholder. They've been weighing in publicly. Yes, that's what they've been doing, like all the other stakeholders out there weighing in with their letters and materials. And I think he was invited to present at one of the workshops. But
yes, he did present at a workshop. Yes, most recently, the 2030 model. LCFS targets. Yeah.
Yeah, they did their own modeling using their own tools. I just want to make sure that we're clear about their role, because I don't want to have all of you think that spending time with them is somehow spending time directly with us. They're separate from us.
No, they're all separate from you. I think that's intentional, right? I mean, that's built in, that you don't do this work, or if you do it, you send it out and have it independently reviewed, right?
Because it's a market program, we do our work internally or under contract with specific parties. We put that out for everyone, and then folks like Dr. Murphy from UC Davis can then weigh in on it in the public setting. But that's how we do our work on these programs, because they're market programs, and giving access or giving information about what those programs could look like from us as the administrators could be in conflict with how we operate, since there are markets out there that move on different things that we put out, information we put out. So we're very particular about the way we handle this program, just because of that concern.
It was mentioned last night by one of the commenters, and I don't know if it's true or not. You could probably tell us that, in fact, even us holding this conversation and the threat of this regulation potentially has actually slowed down investment in this particular area. Would that be an accurate statement?
I think we have heard that claim as well.
Mm-hmm.
We've been focused on working through the regulation and implementing the program, but I don't at this moment have data to confirm that. I'm not
support a cause and effect there.
I'm sorry?
You don't have data to support a cause and effect there.
Well, I personally don't in this moment, as I'm talking to you, because I didn't expect the question. Is it something we can look at and get back to you on? Sure, we can do that.
Great, thanks. I thought it was an interesting comment. I wonder, it would make sense. I mean, the market is very sensitive to these kinds of things. And given the breadth of this, especially the amount of money that's involved, it wouldn't surprise me that any threat would, especially, again, it's a high risk venture anyway. So I could see some of the investors being a little shaky about the whole thing and then letting certain people know. So I just wondered if CARB had heard anything like that. So you can find out for us and let us know.
Yeah, what I can say is that anytime we open up a regulation like LCFS and there's uncertainty around the rules moving forward, we have seen historically that investment pulls back. I don't have data here right now to identify what that looks like for this regulatory process that we're in today. But historically that has happened because, as you can imagine, investors don't like uncertainty. They like certainty so they can make investment, they can do the math, the numbers, understand the risks of any investment that they make and how long they can count on something to be able to have a payback for that initial investment. Because they do take out loans, they do take money from other venture funds, et cetera.
Great, makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Catherine?
Yeah, thank you. And definitely want to encourage the continued generation of potential agenda items. I also, from a process perspective, I understand that we have some changing limitations in terms of Bagley-Keene exemption. So I'm kind of clear on those, but I think that also might be a helpful level set for the committee if we can get an update on what the status of in-person quorum is. I've heard at least through this year, possibly longer, that we are not held to those. And so for people who have travel limitations, that they'll be able to join virtually, at least for October and November. So that would be helpful for folks to know. And as much as I love the virtual options, I also hope that we'll still be able to offer an in-person location for October and November. So one is just process update on Bagley-Keene would be helpful. And then number two is I'd like to go ahead and task the internal team of the CARB staff and the co-chairs with developing a draft 2024 calendar and coming back with that at the October meeting so that we have time to put it in front of the whole committee and make sure that that's going to work for folks to make sure that we can get that on people's calendars. So an additional request there as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments on this topic and item? Everybody get what they need at this point? Okay. Thank you. Okay, perfect. So we're looking for a response to the question about the in-person, online, and changes potentially that impact that. And wait just a moment and pause and see if there's any additional thoughts that come up.
Hello, everyone. Deldy Reyes, CARB. So I do want to just pass on some news about SB 143. This suspends all of the physical presence requirements of Bagley-Keene. It applies to the advisory body. It applies to our board. It is effective until the end of the calendar year. So that means any meetings we want to have between now and the end of the calendar year, we can go back to 100% virtual if that's what the committee desires. I hear you, Catherine, also suggesting that there be an option for in-person physical presence. And maybe that's something we can talk about in the co-chairs meeting. Also, there's SB 544. What I was trying to find out is the status of that, because in the email that I received on the 14th, which was yesterday, it said that it was still pending. As you know, we are waiting for things. If it is enacted in its current form, it would become effective January 1 and go until January 2026. And for our board, the most recent version would require a quorum in one physical location with the rest of the members free to participate from remote private locations. And there are some different requirements that would apply to advisory bodies like the EJAC. So I think we're still a little bit on hold in terms of what's the status of it and how do we really unpack how it applies. But we will make a priority of getting the latest advice from our legislative office in time for our next co-chairs meeting.
Thank you.
SB 544. Correct.
Can you repeat what 544 was about?
Sure. So for 544, it would basically mean that we would have to have a quorum in one physical location. And then other members could participate remotely from private locations. That would not have to be public noticed the way we currently have to do. But there are different requirements that would apply to the advisory bodies, and I don't have in front of me what those are, so I can't give you any more detail at this moment.
Okay, so basically, if one passes, the other one has to fail, or would they both?
No, they're
stand?
separate. SB 143 has passed, it's done, it is in effect, and that covers us for the rest of this calendar year. And it means that we can go back to remote, 100% remote meetings, if that's what we want to do.
Okay, thank you. And you were saying that 544 is the one that you don't have as much information about.
Right, as of yesterday, it was still pending.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thomas.
I was saving this comment for the end and the closing remarks, but we're on the subject. So I agree, with Catherine on the importance of still having some in-person meetings. And I was going to say, what I've gotten the most out of the in-person meetings, besides in-person meetings in general, you get to talk to folks afterwards during the breaks, you get to meet more people, I get to meet more staff, to meet even, folks from the public, even from the company that I've been talking about. I've, met him, talked to him, maybe we've had some conversations since then. So that's like a really important part to me. And the other important part is how we've gone to different communities and how we've taken the tours. Not only for me, I think it's important for staff and even board members to, attend some of those tours. I was kind of joking yesterday. I was like, yeah, we haven't gone to Bakersfield yet. People probably don't want to actually be there to breathe the air, right? Even for a couple of days. But, it's important to go to these communities. I had heard about, places like Wilmington. I had seen the pictures of a oil drilling rig right next to somebody's home, but it is different when you are there and you are meeting the people that live there and you're talking to them about their experiences. So I'm kind of torn because I understand the importance of giving people that flexibility of if they can't make it a lot, I'm a little closer to Sacramento than a lot of folks, so I have that privilege, but so I do like that you have that option, but I think that it is important to, have those in-person meetings and, be able to go to different communities and actually see the things that we're talking about. I think that's all I was gonna say on that.
Thanks, Thomas. Are hands raised or comments on this? Sharif.
Thank you. I know as the SB 544 is still pending, and we're considering the calendar for next year, it would be helpful based off of Thomas's comment for us to consider our taxi tour schedule, because like you were just saying about the taxi tours and the relationships we've built and the knowledge that we've obtained through the taxi tours, especially having Jill be the first Indigenous EJAC member in the history of the EJAC. I think aside from just seeing your tribe reservation, it would be great to see some of the other tribal lands that you represent, especially given the different considerations we talk about but we don't really understand. And so if that's something that we could kind of loop into our taxi tours, that would be great. And then also seeing places that we haven't talked about as much, that would be great too, because even though people might do it in more creative ways, like the gentleman yesterday dressed like a pimp, it does get your attention, And so I think it's worthwhile to kind of explore those underexplored areas.
Any others on this topic?
Wait a minute. There was somebody dressed like a pimp yesterday?
What's that? Yeah.
Teatro at the meeting yesterday? I guess I missed it, huh? Interesting.
I could send you a picture if you really want it.
Go for it, send it. It sounds like a funny thing, but all right.
What he said was really serious. He had a point to dressing the way he did. And he brought up a really salient point that, you know, there are groups in the communities that we work in, and he was in a way kind of insulting the EJAC, claiming somehow that we were claiming to speak for our communities when we are simply representatives of different groups in our communities, and we live in those communities, so we can speak for our experiences and people who've given us permission to speak for their experiences as well. But so he made sort of a grandiose statement there. He obviously had a problem with the new board member from South Sacramento because he called him out and said, and Phil Cerna, he definitely had a problem with. So he kind of aired that out. But underneath that was this concern that, you know, while we're pushing forward electrification, and we've heard this in other areas as well, obviously small trucking firms and others who either don't know anything about it, or when they hear about it, like, screw that, man. How would I do that? I can't get that. Doesn't make any sense for me. I do this. Or in his case, he was talking about lowriders. You know, how can I make this 64 Chevy Impala, you know, electric? Excuse me, man. You know, the hydraulics is one thing, but look at the car, man. I don't have the money for that. So I got that. You know, I understand that, and I didn't particularly like the way he phrased it. I thought it was confrontational. And again, calling out one of the members there a little too personal, but I got it. I didn't think it was wrong. I thought he was right. You know, it's true.
That's what I figured. I mean, you know, we've done that in the past in some of the media.
If I could, excuse me, I'm gonna, if I may, just because this is a little off the topic, but if you want to continue your conversation offline, that's absolutely
Yeah, my bad.
appropriate. No,
I thought it
thank
was
you.
important that it was understood that, you know, in no way,
Sure.
you could leave an impression there that I didn't want to leave behind. That's all.
Thank you, Kevin.
I
Well,
agree.
I'll look back to the co-chairs to see if this item feels complete for you before we potentially transition to public comment.
Yeah, I think I would close out this item by, as always, inviting committee members to reach out to your co-chairs if you have further suggestions for agenda items. I think we've put together a pretty solid set of things that we can follow up on in October and November, come back with a calendar for next year. And we already know that there's a couple of really big, ambitious rulemakings that we'll want to be looking at, as well as the EJ policy. So definitely look forward to those continuing. Also, I know in a minute we're going to segue to public comment. So I just wanted to echo what I said last night, which is really reinforcing the call for decorum. I really want to name that last EJAC meeting, there were some commenters who I personally found to be offensive and inappropriate in the public forum by calling EJAC members names, which I just don't think is productive for the kind of dialogue that we want to have. I also want to encourage committee members to practice discretion and generally not responding to public commenters. I know we get a whole variety of commenters and we have a lot of really interesting people speak to us and we would like to engage with them. And at the same time, I've found the last few meetings that at times that can take us off topic or take up more time than we've allotted for public comment. And I'm concerned that undermines our goal of equity of airtime. So I think like a lot of other boards, we should generally not respond to public commenters during the meeting, whether we agree or disagree with them. I think we should approach them offline and we always have the opportunity to invite them to future meetings and they have their 2 to 3 minutes to speak to us. So really just want to reinforce, I think, public dialogue is absolutely important to our deliberation and to the recommendations we're going to come forward with. And again, it should really be about concepts and not people. So wanted to keep those in mind as we segue to public comment. I'll pass it back to you, Martine.
Thank you, Dr. Catherine. I see a hand raised, Luis. And so prior to going to public comment, we'll acknowledge your hand raised.
So you know, there's two things that I would like to Pose for CARB discussion, deliberation, or maybe it's an easy ask that CARB can just do it, right? But we need to have access to legal in regards to bag leaking. So we need to understand how to access California Resources Board legal support. I mean, we are, after all, an advisory of the California Resources Board. And most recently now we've been institutionalized into the California Resources Board, permanent body to help advise. So that would be very useful. I would like to have more conversation. Past, there has been conversation as to why not. I would love to hopefully have a conversation as to why it's necessary and why it's important and why it needs to be common sense, no brainer, right? To have that kind of support to the EJAC. The other subject is on what continues to be pushed off as the update of the environmental justice policy for the California Resources Board. I have not seen the enthusiasm, so I figure like every meeting I'll bring it up. And maybe after a few years, the preponderance of evidence might show that maybe the California Air Resource Board doesn't have interest in updating its own 2 decades old environmental justice policy. So I'm not here to force anyone to do anything they don't want. I'm just here to put it on the record that I would like for that policy to be a discussion and hopefully lead to a plan and resource allocation. We're living a point in time where the environmental justice has historical more resources than ever before. And so I think this is the moment that if any time is the right time, is the right now to get that policy updated. I consider it as it's the heart and the commitment of the California Resources Board. I hope I'm not offending anyone by saying this. You know, I'm a religious person myself, but it's like I consider it the Bible for environmental justice within CARB. So I think it's important to get that updated and accurately reflective of all the progress and opportunities that have been made available through the legislature and thanks to the board of the California Resources Board. And that document should be reflective of all that progress. Right. So thank you.
Thank you. I believe that concludes. Okay, now we'll move on to public comment. That concludes, I believe, the conversation from EJAC members on this item, which then means that we'll move to public comment. And we'll go ahead and monitor the Zoom. And what I can see here is we have one hand raised at this time. So we'll acknowledge Jan.
Thank you, Jan Warren, Interfaith Climate Action Network of Contra Costa County. Just a few comments. Yeah, Rajinder, when we're talking about SB 905, she's right in terms of no new authority. As a matter of fact, they always want to, I shouldn't say they, I'll say the powers that be want to give, split up all the powers, you know, so that it's very difficult to get anything done. And so our experience in Contra Costa County in dealing with refineries is that the monitoring and enforcement is the most difficult piece for Bachman and for us and for other entities that split up these things, that anytime there's an incident or flaring, well, you know, it's broken into all these pieces, which makes it very difficult. And we just passed quite a few climate bills this year. This is the last day. Got to get them signed now. But SB 674, which would have made a statewide monitoring consistent program for all these not just refineries, but, you know, the power industry stuff as well. They shot us down because, I mean, we're going to come back and keep fighting them, but they don't want they have different toxins they have to measure. They don't want to give you the public access to go to a website and see these things. So it's very, very difficult. And we just have to keep working on some of these things. And I just wondered if Regina could tell us on these CAPOs, is CARB monitoring and enforcing anything with these CAPOs that are already in existence? Thank you.
Thank you, Jan, and we'll make note of your question and we'll go on to our next person who has their hand raised. LaDonna, you will have 2 minutes as well.
Yes, LaDonna Williams, good afternoon, all positives possible. First, I wanted to address, sometimes the screen is not flashing who's speaking when you mention equity of airtime. And I would suggest that maybe you should consider limiting the time that the board speaks, since you limit the time so freely of the public, taking from 3 minutes to 2 and even sometimes 1 minute, that you also respectfully give the board time limits in speaking so that there is equity of time and folks are heard, because we keep forgetting that you serve the public. It's not the public serves you. So, you know, you're supposed to be addressing our concerns and including our issues. Also, I'm concerned in hearing about reinforcing decorum and basically trying to control how the public speaks and communicates their concerns. As long as they are not being belligerent or cussing anybody out, they should be able to call out those who are making comments or rules or regulations that impact our health and our existence. Absolutely. It is individual people that are making comments under a body. You don't get to hide behind that body or that agency and do your dirt and then expect that folks are not going to react to it. No, this impacts our lives. We have to keep coming before you to plead and beg for you to do the right thing. And that's not questioning those that are trying to do the right thing, but somehow EJ and our poorest communities always gets the shorter end of the stick. I'm glad to hear today that there are certain members that are starting to push back more stronger against CARB and its policies, but we do need to be pushing interagency decisions and actions taken around environmental justice within the agency and your discriminatory practices. And as someone mentioned, we should be able to look into the legal aspect as well. We're the public. You are to serve us. It should be transparent. And how else can we do that? Because too many times we hear, oh, you want input, and then the advisory committee are committed to these meetings and giving recommendations only for them to be ignored. So at some point, we've got to change business as usual. If we're about environmental justice, then let's be about it and stop ignoring it when it's put before you, so that it has to keep being repetitive, keep coming before you only for you to ignore it. But we won't be silenced. And I'm glad last night someone showed up and showed out enough to get your attention. We need more of that if you're going to continue to ignore our recommendations that many times have been ignored and has cost us our lives and our community's health. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public want to comment on this item? So please raise your hand on Zoom, or anybody in the room here? No additional comments on Zoom. Okay, so that will go ahead and conclude public comment then at this time. And Rajinder, I didn't know if there was a question by a member of the public for you specifically, if you want to respond to that question.
Yes, I do. And I'm still trying to figure out if everyone that's an attendee can see my chat. But there was a workshop in March of 2022, March 29th of 2022, and it has a recording and several presentations by a lot of stakeholders, government and external non-government, that speak to the different kinds of regulations and permits at CAPOs and the activity that happens to enforce all of those, from water to air to other aspects of having those large dairies in the state, and even what USDA is doing on that front. So I would like to direct the commenter and anyone that's interested to that workshop. It's on our webpage, arb.ca.gov. And if you search for dairy workshop, it should take you right to it. So that's arb.ca.gov and search for dairy workshop. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. Yes. Okay, we'll go to,
Yes, thank you, Martine. I just want to thank Kevin for posting in the chat, and for the benefit of the attendees, I want to just read his chat. 544 was passed by the legislature and enrolled today. It will be sent to the governor today. Remote meetings are just one of a number of California government changes it would create. One is increasing the role of the Senate in certain political appointments, a change that the governor may not be enthused about. If signed, it would better define remote and extend the model indefinitely. The most recent version seems clear in that regard. Thank you so much, Kevin. We will be consulting with our legal office about the implications of 544, and we'll be prepared to share that with you all at the co-chairs meeting.
thank you. Louise, I want to acknowledge that your hand is raised as well before we transition from this item.
It's not my intent to necessarily at this point respond to public comments nor engage in debate. But I did want to, and I should have brought this earlier when we first brought the conversation of decorum. Communities have, in many different ways, been confronted with many struggles that they didn't ask for. They've been prescribed to them. And it's important that we show up with an open mind. And I'm assuming that my EJ colleagues in the CJAC understand that. But maybe not everyone altogether who has power and influence into how communities' lives and conditions can be improved might not necessarily understand that struggle, right? And of course, I'm not saying who or who's not, because many times we don't know until we engage in conversation. And sometimes we might be pleasantly surprised that we share a lot of those struggles. So I tried not to be offended by the way people show up, you know, short of utilizing colorful language that I think that we should be very thoughtful and mindful of that. But I welcome people showing up and expressing their passion, their frustration, their anger, because not everybody has at their disposal the perfect words and the perfect way to present their struggle, their frustration, their harm. So I welcome it. I want to hear it. And if they want to show up in peaceful demonstration, I welcome it. Because sometimes it's necessary. And we've seen how many times throughout history that has been necessary. So that's it. Thanks.
Okay, at this point, we'll transition back to the co-chairs for any next steps in closing remarks. So I'll hand that to Dr. Catherine and Martha Dina.
Yeah, so again, I want to thank the committee and the CARB staff for working to pull this agenda and all of these important items for discussion together today. We're looking forward to having meetings on October 13th and November 11th and offline as co-chairs. We'll continue to plan that with the CARB staff team. So we've heard the requested items and presentations today and would just ask committee members if they have other recommendations to follow up with us offline. And with that, I'll pass it to Martha Dina.
I'm trying to figure out where we are in the agenda. Good, okay, last items. Okay, so we've done a number of decisions that Catherine went over, set our meetings, some of the desire we have for ongoing meetings. And I just want to, as one of the longest serving members, there's times when I ask myself why, because each time we've made recommendations, they've been ignored. And sometimes you hang on to small changes, and I have seen, small changes in how we engage with CARB as an EJAC. It is completely different if I were to put on my PSR hat, right? So what I am hoping for these next couple of meetings is that we manage with staff, particularly ISD, to really do a lot of listening and acknowledging of the concerns that the environmental justice community has. I was quickly trying to find, there's an old report about the history of enforcement. And so sometimes the response is, well, there's another department that's regulating that and enforcing that. But yet, and I said this last night, the communities that we work with and many of the people who show up all the time are the living embodiment of the failure of regulations to protect people's health. And so I think at this point, given where we are with the climate crisis, it is not enough to say we're going to regulate it. I think that the ethos of prevention and public health is sorely missing. And, I've been in, struggles since I was 14. And so I don't give up from a fight and I don't step back from a fight, but it's incumbent on CARB to figure this out, because these are not reversible technologies. We've seen that we created a program that's now created financial incentives, and we saw their lobbyist here, and that's actually who called us names. Environmental justice community comes and demands us to do better, but they don't call us names. And I want that to be really clear about what we're saying, right? They hold us accountable as we should be, but they do it with love, as it should be. And we try to bring that love here, but it is really hard when the answers that we get are the same answers that we've gotten before, and we know that that's not going to work. So you have an opportunity with carbon capture not to go down a road that isn't going to get us the solutions that we want. So I'm very worried about what I heard about. We're going to decide first what is a cumulative impact, and then we're going to do something else, because we've been down that road of what is a cumulative impact. Well, I don't know. And now we have a tool that sort of measures cumulative impact, but that took a long time, right? So, we keep being put in a situation, a no-win situation. And so we will continue to show up here and do the best work that we can as an environmental justice movement. But we do expect, and we hope, and yesterday was hopeful, that the board is hearing us and that we can work with staff to actually do this right and achieve better health for communities. That's the number one thing. You can tell me at the end of the day that you did your algebra trick and that you got net zero, but there's still people dying, and that's not acceptable.
Thank you, Martha Dina and Dr. Catherine, for your closing remarks and next steps. At this point, I don't believe there's any other business. Oh, go, Thomas, please.
Yeah, I had one item. I don't know if it's for, explanation at a future meeting, but it was just something that I had a question about, and then I've heard others have a question about. I know we had our meeting in San Francisco, and we approved the charter, and we had robust discussion. I had questions that got answered, and it was all clear to me then. And then after, reviewing and asking some questions, I'm unclear about a couple things. So I want to put them out there for whoever might have the answer. Maybe it's a gray area. But the language in the charter says that the exception for the 13, and there's going to be 11 members eventually, but the exception for the 13 members continuing are reappointed by the board March 23rd, 2023, who will serve out the 36-month term. Okay, that seems to me to say, because the charter, it's like now we're a new permanent EJAC, we're being reappointed, and maybe I'm wrong about that, March 23rd, 2023. That would be, take us to March 2026. Down under term of appointment, it says members appointed to the EJAC will be for a term of 36 months that begins on the date the EJAC member is first appointed. So I guess the question is, first appointed under this charter or first appointed in general? So for me, that would have been June 2021, which would mean, so that's a difference of either March 2026 or June 2024. This kind of came up because I'm, looking at long-term planning and wondering what I'm going to have time for in the future and, what I'm going to be focused on. So, and I was kind of unclear too on if there was term. It says that you can request in writing before your term is up if you would like to have another term. And I was kind of curious if I couldn't see anything about a term limits, like 2 terms or 3 or whatever. So that's kind of a secondary question. But that first one was really, is it appointment from when the charter started, March 23rd, 2023, or is it June of 2021? I guess is the question.
Or we have a response, go ahead.
Before Carb responds, I want you to, if the terminology of first appointed applied, several of us will not even be here. So just wanted to make that clear before we got a response.
Thank you, Tom, for that question. This is Deldy Reyes from CARB. So we're going to confer with legal. They are listening right now, and I did ask, and there's not an immediate response, so we will confer. I will say, just as a layperson who's not an attorney, sounds to me like it was effective with the new charter and the most recent appointment, but again, I'm no attorney. I'll probably be scolded for saying this, but hey, I'm just telling you what I think.
Why I wanted to make sure I say that, because I anticipated that there wouldn't be an immediate response, even though it's a common sense, right? Want to get ahead of that and prove my point.
Okay. I believe that then concludes this item, this agenda for today. I want to thank you for allowing me to facilitate, and I will go ahead and adjourn this meeting and thank everyone for their participation. Luis. Prior to adjourn.
I should have caught it before you said that. But would it be appropriate that the co-chairs actually be the ones? I don't want to insert anything that they might not be desired to by the chairs. But it would just seem to me it would be kind of the most appropriate that our chairs would adjourn the meeting. I'd leave it up to the chairs,
Certainly, I'm just following the script that
I did want to mention, I put in the chat, my understanding would be normally the establishment of EJAC as permanent being brand new, everything would start from that day, Tom. But yeah, I'm curious to hear what CARB's attorneys have to say. But in other circumstances where I've seen similar things, that's been the way it works. The same with a new law. As of that day, everything in the past is pretty much gone unless it's brought in intentionally. I'm curious to see. Sorry, just wanted to get that in.
Okay, why don't we turn it to the co-chairs for adjournment and close.
I've spent my entire political career trying to avoid Robert's rules. So I always forget the formality. So given that we have no more questions and we've completed public comment, I move to adjourn the meeting.
So move.
Okay. Have a wonderful weekend and the meeting is now adjourned.